At the time of this upload, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End first released on the PlayStation 4 7 years ago now, which makes me feel a special kind of old because back when this game first came out, Jay's Reviews actually existed and was making content. At the time of this game's release, I was working on my Ratchet & Clank original versus remake video when this game was new. But if we're going to talk about that history, we better go back to the beginning. The previous videos have all talked about the Uncharted games in the context surrounding them, Naughty Dog, and PlayStation. This one will be no different. If you recall, it was the spring of 2013, 10 years ago now, when I first got into the Uncharted trilogy, with no idea that more was ever going to come since June of 2013 saw the release of what is probably Naughty Dog's most iconic game at this point, The Last of Us. Normally when ND started a new series, that became their focus for a while, but fast forward a few months and it's late 2013. The PlayStation 4 is out, and alongside that you have the announcement trailer for Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. I was at the middle school dance in 7th grade and I went to the bathroom, and while scrolling my phone I saw the trailer for Uncharted 4 had dropped, but I couldn't get the thing to load and the school's horrifically bad Wi-Fi connection, so I had to wait to watch it later. It didn't show anything though, so we had to wait until E3 2014 to get the proper CG trailer of Nate waking up on the island that had people convinced this was in-game graphics. But it was late 2014 when I finally got my hands on a PS4, as Uncharted 4 and Batman Arkham Knight were going to be exclusive to next-gen consoles, so I might as well get one, and use that as a chance to experience The Last of Us for the first time via its PS4 remaster, alongside Tomb Raider 2013, but I haven't played that in years. The PS4 was much different than the PS3 in that this was the console to own throughout the 8th generation, partially thanks to the fact that Microsoft dropped the ball with the launch of the Xbox One harder than I've ever seen any company do in my lifetime, giving the PS4 a huge boost. But Sony also invested heavily in first-party games on PlayStation 4. Many of those ended up being the console's best-selling games, so it was certainly a good strategy on its own merits. Advertisements for this game dominated the TV back in 2016. Even my sister, who doesn't play console games anymore, said it looked really good. Uncharted 4 was set for a 2015 release date, however it was delayed a couple times, eventually releasing on May 10th of 2016. When this came out to universal critical acclaim for pushing the video game industry further than it ever went before in terms of action set pieces, graphics, and production values, I was right alongside everyone else. I thought this game was incredible back in 2016. However, I will say now I never touched it more than once. I beat it, thought it was great, I just never had a phase of replaying it like I did the PS3 games. Guess the YouTube grind was in effect even back then. Which is why I was so excited for this video in particular, because I had kind of an idea of what I'd think of the first 3 Uncharted games, even if I enjoyed 1 and 3 more than I feared I would. Uncharted 4 though was one I remember so fondly, but I also remember almost nothing about it, so I was curious to see where this journey was going to take me. Spoiler alert, Uncharted 4 is absolutely fantastic through and through, so let's talk about it. The moment I started playing this game for the video, I was hooked. You play as Nate alongside a new character, Sam, driving this boat on the ocean through the thunderstorm being chased by an army of goons. There were parts here where I wasn't sure what was gameplay and what was a cutscene, like how the enemies start trying to blow you out of the water and then that sends Nate underwater and you swim back to the boat. It was so frantic that I wasn't sure if this was scripted or a part of the scene, but I couldn't stop and think about it as you narrowly swim out of the way of boat propellers. When I played this part a second time, I saw it happen again, but the pacing here does bring about that desired frantic effect. The boat gets rammed by a bigger boat that sends Nate and Sam both underwater as we then go back to how this story began, which makes 3 Uncharted games now that have used this plot device, but hey, it makes for an effective, action-packed hook. You then see a flashback level that takes place long before the one from Uncharted 3 where you see Nate is in an orphanage. Sam is his older brother, as you then get another flashback that takes place years later as Nate, Sam, and a new character called Rafe have gotten stuck in a Panamanian jail trying to find a lead on the treasure of the pirate captain Henry Avery. But in their escape attempt, Sam is shot and presumed dead by Nate. Fast forward to after Uncharted 3 and Nate is working as a salvage diver and lives a quiet life with Elena. Until Sam comes back into the mix, having survived and spent the last 15 years in jail, but now has a lead on Avery's treasure that he needs Nate's help to recover, or else he'll get killed by his former cellmate, Hector Alcazar. Bringing Nate and Sullivan back for one last mission to find the treasure before Rafe and his mercenary army does so they can save Sam's life from Alcazar, all the while Nate lies to Elena about his current whereabouts. If you haven't played these games before, I'm sure you can already see just how much more complicated and involved the plot of Uncharted 4 is compared to the previous games. And these were always games that had a story at the forefront. Things were just taken to the next level here. But as always, I like to save story discussion for a bit later in the video and just dive into gameplay first after establishing some basic context. Coming into this game, I was surprised at just how much smoother the controls were compared to the original trilogy. The goal of these games is always to create a character who moved like a believable human being, this being something the animators in the trilogy got better at with each installment, as they found ways to make Nate's actual handling more smooth as well. But here I think they absolutely nailed it. Running around and stuff feels super smooth, while jumping around and climbing and swinging on ropes has the weight and gravity behind it that you'd want in order to maximize the impact of each movement. And then all the usual mechanics are the best they've ever been, like turning on cover, aiming, rolling, punching, tossing grenades, and the list goes on. This game brings in all these extra touches to the formula that make it slightly better, such as ammo on the ground flashing to alert you to when enemies have more ammo for the weapons you currently possess. Also making it so you have to hold down the triangle button for a second or two to switch weapons, reducing the chance you might just spam the triangle button and grab the wrong thing. I love how the reticle turns orange when you land a headshot, as it adds more satisfaction to it. I know The Last of Us had a signifier for headshots, but I forget if the Uncharted games did before 4. Cut me some slack here, it's been over a month since I made the Uncharted 3 video. The point I'm trying to make is that this game is absolutely full of little details that really fine-tune the Uncharted experience for the next generation console. Which doesn't even speak on how it looks. The visuals in Uncharted 4, even today, are absolutely jaw-dropping. This is something I felt early in my playthrough, but then the game managed to continue topping itself throughout. All the tools ND had developed for its realistic graphics in the Uncharted trilogy and The Last of Us were all designed for the PS3's Cell processor, but with PS4 that was out and they had to start from scratch again. But they had plenty more memory to work with in the new system, and so the artists beautifully captured a bunch of different effects, like changing lighting conditions, entirely different regions with diverse attributes like snowy mountains, the jungle, water, open fields, and crowded cities. This game looks stellar, borderline lifelike, managing to wow players with some of the same tropes the PS3 games had, but done so much better that it stuns you all over again. This game perfects everything you remember from the previous games, but then finds new ways to wow you in terms of scale and scope. Uncharted 4 goes full open world in the middle as Nate, Sully, and Sam drive around looking for a temple. This part was so impressive because Naughty Dog hadn't done an open world since the Jack games, and now you can clearly see how much bigger these worlds can be and how much more realistic the driving physics can get when you play the open segments of Uncharted 4, and remember what it was like driving the buggies of Jack 3 in 2004 on a smaller map. Of course, there were plenty of open world games by other studios between these games, but it was really awesome to experience ND going back to that style in the middle of this action-packed thrill ride of a game. You drive around, but you can get out of the car at any time and explore caves and all these other mini objectives that have nothing to do with the main storyline. It's a pretty fleshed out open segment that is just one small piece of a large campaign. I just do not know how they pulled off having this much content on one PS4 disc. It's insane. I was playing this on the recently released Legacy of Thieves collection for PlayStation 5, which includes Uncharted 4 and Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, both enhanced for PlayStation 5, utilizing the DualSense controller for features like adaptive triggers and all that. This collection also boosted the frame rate from 30 to 60, with options for 30 and a 4K resolution if that's your preference. While playing this game on PS5, you'd fool me into thinking it was a contemporary release because it's aged incredibly well visually. I kept thinking while playing, how did this not make the PS4 explode? But I decided to load the PS4 version on my actual PlayStation 4 just to see, and the result was, it pretty much did. And that was during the loading screen. Although you can hear my AC in the background of this clip, which is most of the sound, but take my word for it, the console was definitely loud. On PS4 it was 30 FPS like I said, but then would dip a lot when I sampled the action scenes. Also used this heavy motion blur trick to hide the shaky camera movements that would come from that lower frame rate. All things that I think did the game a disservice back when it first came out, but now you can play it without lengthy load screens thanks to the PS5's SSD, and without all the janky compromises the devs had to make back on PlayStation 4. And you get to soak in all those details because Uncharted 4 has much slower pacing than the original trilogy. Now don't get me wrong, when the action's up it's unmistakably Uncharted, but it's pretty clear that Uncharted 4's story and pacing was heavily informed by what the team learned while developing The Last of Us. That game, while still a TPS game like the Uncharted trilogy, was much slower paced throughout. Action scenes were more tense than exhilarating. But between those, the game spent a lot of time just developing the relationships between its characters with extended dialogue sequences. Uncharted 4 had the confidence to tell that more in-depth story because of The Last of Us. But then I was surprised to read that where Uncharted 4 got the confidence to pace out its gameplay in ways different than previous games was actually the Left Behind DLC for The Last of Us 1. I'm not reviewing that game right now, so I guess I won't go too in-depth on it, but in the foreword of the Uncharted 4 art book, Neil Druckmann talks about how that DLC was such a challenge because you had to design an action game campaign based on teen girls in a mall. Once you figure that out and find out that it's well received, then you can see how Uncharted 4 was more comfortable taking it slow, compared to the first 3 games which, even in their slower paced bits, were driving the player towards the next action scene. I was struck by this right at the start where Nate has this job as a diver and you just play his diving job, no action set piece connected to it at all. Developing his relationship with his boss, and then he goes home and you just see/play an extended sequence of his home life with Elena. And then it was absolutely glorious how the two play on their PlayStation and you play as Nate, playing a recreation of Crash Bandicoot 1 from '96 as Nate tries to beat Elena's high score. Let's just ignore the fact that that game never had a score system and also didn't run at 60 FPS, but I'm just saying, the story in game gets so much out of this slower pacing that you can just sit with the characters in moments like this. Grinning ear to ear at such a cute callback to the studio's history with this.
I just can't do this.
It's a bandicoot.
It doesn't look anything like a bandicoot.
Have you ever seen a bandicoot?
No, but I'm sure they don't wear sneakers.
Especially since this was the first time Crash had ever appeared in a game in years at this point, which no doubt set the audience up for his return in the Insane Trilogy remake, but now I'm getting sidetracked. Uncharted 4 also gains from The Last of Us in its usage of partner mechanics. The first 3 games mostly had your AI partner characters run around and try not to get in your way. The Last of Us was similar to that, but it just made Ellie feel a little more real in how much you had to interact with her and how much she would try to help you directly. Uncharted 4 taking that and implementing it in several moments where you team up with other characters. They'll rescue you from enemy grabs, and Sam will team up with Nate in tackling guys to the ground. It uses gameplay to help the player grow attached to the other characters in the story, which is great. While I keep discussing what this game gained from The Last of Us, make no mistake, when the action is on, this is absolutely an Uncharted game at its core. Not only because of its action-packed shootouts, but also because of the trademark set pieces. 4 has the best action scenes in the series as the spectacle is at an all-time high. Like how you'll be driving and the next thing you know, the car will be over a freaking cliff and you gotta drive up the rock wall like it's Batman Forever. Or when Nate and Sully are getting chased by the enemy truck through the entire city, busting through fences and backyards.
Hey, Nate.
Yeah?
We can never, ever come back to this city.
Add it to the list.
But then you're chasing down a convoy trying to get to Sam, which leads to Nate grappling onto this car and being dragged down the road as you blast motorcycles and cars all around you. Uncharted 4 never lets up with action scenes. Uncharted 2, for example, was epic for having an exploding building and a moving train, but now, 7 years later, you can just do all of that like it's nothing in addition to a plethora of other set pieces all throughout the campaign. These being the best action set pieces in the series, and this game having the most fun combat. The combat maps have increased in complexity because of the new rope mechanic. Nate can send a rope onto branches and such and swing around. This gives Nate more mobility in combat as you can quickly cover ground and get higher up with ease, which is fun to do by itself, but then is immensely satisfying as you can jump off the rope and punch guys who are on the ground. I never get sick of doing that. The rope also made platforming more interesting than it usually is in this series, as you'll be climbing from point to point like always and then break into a swing. The third act also introduces this climbing tool where you press square when jumping over rock walls to dig into the wall. Still not particularly complicated or anything, but it's just more fun to play around with and adds that extra bit of depth to the platforming. The stealth mechanics have also received an upgrade. Merely adding them made the second game feel more dynamic than the first, but 4 just makes it feel more real as enemies will spot you, but you have a couple seconds to hide before they investigate and confirm that something suspicious is going on. You can hide in tall grass and tall flower beds from enemies, and even mid-fight you can escape the enemies and go back into stealth mode while the enemies search for you, which only increases the level of high-octane gameplay from previous installments. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, Uncharted 4 didn't just ramp up the gameplay and action of the franchise, it also took the storytelling to the next level. Just looking at the production values alone, this game was the first game ND did with full performance capture. Prior to this, they just had the actors moving around in mocap suits. This game went the extra mile of capturing every facial movement of the actors in each scene. The way actors use their eyes and face to react to things just adds an extra layer of realism to the performance, which feels right alongside these supremely detailed character models built for the PS4 that have effects the PS3 couldn't even dream of, like sweat coming down the characters' faces and such. The characters looking aged up from the previous game adds to the journey we've been on with them over these last 10 years worth of games as they've gotten more detailed with each adventure. Some in the cast was also feeling now that they knew this was the last one. The actual story of Uncharted 4 being the best in the series, if you ask me. But with all this talk of behind the scenes info going on, I think it would be wrong to discuss my thoughts on the story we got without first halting the brakes in this review and mentioning the fact this is actually going to be a completely different plot at one point in its life. To take things back a few years, Naughty Dog had split into 2 divisions following the release of Uncharted 2. One team was led by Amy Hennig and Justin Richmond doing Uncharted 3. The other team was led by Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley as they directed The Last of Us. Following the launch of Uncharted 3 in 2011, that branch of Naughty Dog began conceptualizing the 4th Uncharted for PlayStation 4 led by Amy Hennig and Justin Richmond like always. Until spring of 2014 when it was announced that Hennig and Richmond were departing Naughty Dog entirely and Straley and Druckmann were going to take on the roles of creator and game directors for Uncharted 4. It needs to be said that much of this is shrouded in mystery, and due to NDAs and all that, we might never know what truly happened here. Early reports said that Hennig and Richmond were forced out of the company, which co-presidents Evan Wells and Christoph Balestra denied being the case. I've seen conspiracy theories that Neil Druckmann masterminded the whole thing to spread the woke agenda, But to believe that, you have to be the kind of idiot who spends years of their life on an anti-Last of Us 2 subreddit, which definitely does not exist. Nolan North did say people were let go of in the transition to the new team, so that definitely shows people were leaving the team, but not enough evidence to say there was some kind of malicious game going on behind the scenes, as the presidents of the studio claimed at the time that decisions of this kind always go through them, which is the only actual statement we have to go off of. So if we don't know what happened, and I refuse to buy into unsubstantiated conspiracy theories, what is the point? Well, these videos and my Jack videos before them have been about Naughty Dog and its evolution, alongside my thoughts in the individual games. Even though we don't know what led to the decisions, we do know how much of an effect they had on the development of Uncharted 4. I mean, this is spring of 2014. A lot of dev time has now been lost because the story that was written was also being changed to steer this towards being the final game in the Uncharted series. Now, the original Uncharted 4 still focused on the treasure of Henry Avery and the return of Nate's brother Sam. However, if you rewatch the teaser trailer, you can tell the tone was a lot different.
But you can't outrun the past. And when it catches up, when all your lies collapse around you, I'll be there, sifting through the wreckage. You owe me.
Sam was recast as Troy Baker, who portrayed Joel Miller in The Last of Us. Nolan North said he was happy to be working with Troy Baker since they already had such a great rapport from before this game was in production, so therefore working together was really natural for them on the set of Uncharted 4. Sam's relationship with Nate stayed complicated, but Sam was no longer going to be the main villain of the story. Even with the delays Uncharted 4 experienced, the development of this game was crunched because of the fact they lost so much time on having to start the story over. Scenes that were filmed on the mocap stage were scrapped as the story started over again, something I'm sure the actors couldn't complain about too much given the fact that it allowed them to work more, but still it's a very insane sounding environment. Because of these conditions, a lot of legacy staff left after Uncharted 4 released, which no doubt had a large impact on the development crunch that happened for The Last of Us Part 2 until the studio got that situation under control in the years following that game. So what do I think of all that? To be honest, I don't know. It sounds pretty messy from the outside looking in. Amy Hennig got a major credit in this game's credits roll for how important she was in the creation and development of the Uncharted IP, which is more than Bruce Straley got in the HBO adaptation of The Last of Us and more than what most people get in the gaming industry. But was that saving face? I have no idea, I just know it's there. One day, it will be fascinating to learn what the original Uncharted 4 was going to be like, but looking back on the game 7 years later and asking myself the question of, was it worth it? I'd say yes, because like I said, the Uncharted 4 we got was a story I really loved. Neil Druckmann's approach to storytelling is one I resonate with a lot. I gave Uncharted 3 props in that video because the game did focus on Nate's character and that he struggles in his relationship with Elena and the found father-son dynamic between Sully and Nate. I thought 3 did a great job there, but 4's story is next level. The Last of Us made that found family angle the entire story as we saw two characters go from being strangers to having an unbreakable connection. Uncharted 4 was also focused on the emotions and relationships of the people. That was another thing mentioned at the start of the art book. Uncharted 1 and 2 both end with Nate and Elena being together, but 2 and 3 both open with them being separated. When writing 4, they wanted to show, what is it about this guy that makes it difficult for him to have a normal life? So that's why we see his normal life in action. For many, the life that Nate has would be living the dream, getting to dive to the bottom of the river and such, competing with your wife on Crash Bandicoot to see who does the dishes. But for Nate, he just feels the need to be pursuing the exotic. It calls to him in a way that a normal life doesn't, even though he's going to stick with his day-to-day in the meantime. But when Sam shows up with his crazy life or death situation, Nate has to go back for one more mission. Now that sounds a lot more dramatic than a previous game in the series, but it should be said that the game is still full of funny and witty dialogue throughout.
Give it a pull. What? Could be a trap. You're already in there. What's the worst that could happen?
I lose my hand?
So we'll get you a nice hook.
It still feels like a fun summer blockbuster, just with more meat on the bones than previous games. I really like how when Sam first shows up, you get to choose which of the 3 games in the trilogy Nate will recap to his brother, but no matter which option you pick, it always ends the same way.
I mean, what can I say? Another lost city destroyed, and we made it out alive.
Barely.
Unbelievable.
The team was able to poke fun at the fact that the first 3 games were kind of formulaic. This one still has some of that in there, but also doesn't focus on any supernatural beings or enemies at all. Instead, just making the biggest moments revolve around the characters. Towards the finale, it's revealed that Sam lied about his escape from jail. This scene is really interesting to me for several reasons. First, you can see Nate stop Sam from killing Nadine, the leader of Rafe's hired army, because Nate doesn't kill people in cold blood. I always remembered this being a really weird thing to have happen because you shoot enemies constantly throughout Uncharted, but when you look back at the series, you can see, like I said in the Uncharted 2 video, that Nate doesn't do this stuff because he wants to hurt anybody, he just likes trying to discover ancient stuff, which always puts him in the path of crazed maniacs. When Rafe kills the prison guard at the beginning, it feels pretty ruthless and sets him apart from how Nate has been portrayed up to this point in the series. But back to Sam, he never had to escape jail alongside Hector Alcazar at all because Alcazar died in a shootout like 6 months ago. Rafe got Sam out of jail 2 years ago and they looked for Avery's treasure without Nate's knowledge, and Sam only recently decided to bring Nate back into the fold because he felt like the Drake brothers deserved to find the treasure together and Rafe didn't, but cooked up that Alcazar story to make sure Nate would join him. This feels like such a surprise to the audience because the game didn't just tell you about Sam's escape from jail with Alcazar, you had to play it in an extended breakout level. The emotional weight of this lie is felt by the audience and Nate because you see that Nate put his entire marriage on the line to try and save Sam. But throughout all this, I see where all the characters are coming from. The game added to the brothers' backstory by revealing that Sam and Nate's mother was also huge on historical research. The treasure of Avery and the last whereabouts of Francis Drake were all things she was researching before she died. Nate and Sam chose to take the last names Drake because of the theory she had about his having heirs that history didn't know about, something Uncharted 1 teased but didn't go into much past that. These flashbacks add a lot of weight to almost the whole series. For example, it's mentioned that Sam and Nate both had this theory that Francis Drake faked his own death. So now, the opening of Uncharted 1 and the entire El Dorado mission is now recontextualized because we now understand how important that find was to him, but also his brother he thought was dead at that point. Same applies for replaying Uncharted 3. You can understand why it was so important for Nate to steal Drake's ring from that museum instead of just letting Marlowe have it. Point being, the game sells you on how much Nate cares for Sam by showing the previous adventures were all relevant to this off-screen relationship we only just learned about. But now, Nate is a different person. Flash forward to the present, and Sam is 100% in the wrong here. He should have respected the fact that Nate was just not doing this sort of thing anymore and left it at that. But you can see why he would do what he did. I mean, he spent years in jail and is now back, not really wanting to acknowledge that his brother, who didn't rot in jail, had the time to do all the adventuring and then move on with his life. It just feels like a larger-than-life, but human relationship between siblings. The motivations and conflicts between the returning characters all have that same depth as well. Sully, for example, doesn't think Nate should get back in the game nor lie to Elena, but he wants to make sure Nate's gonna be okay and will help for that reason. For Nate, you know it's bad to lie to Elena about what he's doing, but you can imagine why it's more comfortable for him to do that because he wants to be with Elena, but having an honest conversation about his desire for excitement and the fact that he has a brother is difficult, so he doesn't and tries to satisfy both parts of his life at the same time. Elena sees right through the excuses he makes since he was so excited about the treasure the moment before he found out he was caught. I think the story could have spent more time on the consequences of the character's actions. I mean, you never get a conversation between Nate and Sam about why he lied, and Elena, even after rightfully calling out Nate for lying and is concealing so much about his life that she didn't even know he had a brother, still comes back to rescue Nate in the third act. They talk about how they're gonna talk things out, but you don't really get to see much of it. But still, I thought the third act was really compelling, especially by the end with the final battle between Nate and Rafe over the treasure. Nadine locks the Drake brothers and Rafe in the room with the treasure, realizing this crap is not worth any of the struggle. As Rafe decides he's going to kill Nate. Rafe is probably my favorite villain in Uncharted because he's got the most depth to him as a character. Now, I loved what we got in 2 and 3, but I think Rafe makes for a more interesting character than just being an entertaining bad guy. Rafe makes for an interesting mirror to Nate in that he came from enormous wealth and was handed almost everything, and Nate comparatively came from nothing and has done so much. A character who hates and resents Nate so much for all the things we played in the PS3 games is such a great final boss for the last game because Rafe is obsessed with proving himself worthy of the fortune which he's never had the chance to prove before. Nate, at this point, already realized he's got nothing to prove after the events of Uncharted 3, so it makes them contrasting characters. Rafe detests how Nate could be responsible for discovering so much and having nothing to show for it, and somehow being content anyway.
Seriously, Rafe, this is insane, even for you.
You want to hear insane? Nathan Drake raced a madman and his entire army to the steps of Shambhala. Nathan Drake found the lost city in the middle of the Rub al-Khali desert. Nathan Drake discovered the fabled El Dorado.
Come on, Rafe, stop.
Nathan Drake is a legend. You know, I shot the man who told me that.
While also discrediting the actual important things Nate has found while on this journey.
I have sacrificed everything to find Avery, and I'm not gonna let a couple of two-bit thieves, a senile con man, and a washed-up journalist take that away from me!
Nate, after the lie is exposed and reuniting with Elena, finally sees that family is the most important thing here, and not any treasure, and that's why he fights and why he wins over the guy who can't see that. And it's that realization from Nate that allows the ending to feel earned. Elena got her hands on some of the treasure and invested it to where she and Nate could build a career together of exploring the world, entirely legally, making great finds that Nate could be excited about, that Elena could tell great stories about in her job. A win-win, a clean new start. Which brings you to the epilogue, years later, where you play as Nate and Elena's daughter, Cassie, who also likes Crash Bandicoot, although, to be honest, I would have loved it if she was playing Jak and Daxter instead, but that's just me. The game ends on the note of Cassie discovering Nate's old stuff, and they play the music cues from each of the 3 previous games with each artifact. One last hit of nostalgia before her parents explain their backstory to her, ending on this shot of a photo of Nate, Elena, and Sully following Uncharted 1, which I thought was a really definitive note to end the Uncharted series on. It brought all the major arcs of the characters to a close. It reached a point with the game mechanics to where I can't see them getting much better than this. Its visuals are still jaw-dropping almost 10 years later, so yeah. Years after the fact, I can say that Uncharted 4 isn't just great, it's honestly better than I remembered, and this is a game I have fond memories of as is, so that's saying something. I feel like Naughty Dog deciding that this should be the final entry in the series was a wise choice. It allowed them to really dig deep and think of all their best ideas and implement them in one final game that gives us closure on the series and newfound appreciation for it as a multi-game arc. It's everything a great final adventure should be. It's without a doubt my favorite Uncharted game, one that I wholeheartedly recommend to anyone who loves fun action games and entertaining storylines, which is how I'd recommend the entire Uncharted series to anyone, but this one just has it all and I really appreciate it. The game receiving the acclaim it deserved with high scores across the board and millions of copies sold, being one of the best-selling games on the console, certainly one of the best-selling exclusives. A major achievement for ND and for PlayStation, one that certainly cemented the direction PlayStation would go in regarding its focus on first-party exclusives in the coming years. Now, maybe I won't replay Uncharted 4 every day from now to the end of time, but I don't think high replayability is the only mark of a great game. Now, that's certainly one of them, but I also think a game that has a really emotionally compelling experience that keeps you thinking after the game is over and was plenty fun in its own right is also the mark of a great game. Now, I keep talking about this as though it's the last game in the series, but I'm sure you know, the last Uncharted game released was Uncharted: The Lost Legacy in 2017. This being a game I've never played, but it was basically like a DLC installment for Uncharted 4 turned into a full game. So I think it's still fair to talk about Uncharted 4 as though it's the last game while acknowledging that Lost Legacy exists. But regardless, like I said, I've never played this game, so next week we're going to talk about Uncharted: The Lost Legacy as my final video in the Uncharted retrospective. But until that time comes, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.